Welcome to the Blue Oasis podcast. This is the podcast for finding peace and prosperity, learning the history of hobbies, as well as developing a little side hustle. If you want to find peace and prosperity in your life, this is your show. Get ready. You're listening to the Blue Oasis podcast. I am your host, Adam Rothstein. All right, let's get to the show. And welcome back to the Blue Oasis podcast. I am your host, Adam Rothstein. With me today is Andrew Lewin. Andrew, how are you?
I'm very well. Thank you very much for having me, Adam.
Okay, so tell me a bit about yourself.
Yeah, I am a marine biologist and science communicator, and I live up here in Canada. I host the How to Protect the Ocean podcast, and I co-host another podcast called the Beyond Jaws podcast. And both of them are very much ocean focused. The How to Protect the Ocean podcast is pretty much exactly how it sounds. It's teaching the audience how to protect the ocean based on, knowing what's happening with the ocean, understanding how you can speak up for the ocean, and of course, living for a better ocean through your daily life. And then the Beyond Jaws podcast is really about sharks and shark science, but really going beyond what we know about sharks, so going beyond great white sharks and tiger sharks and those iconic species that we normally know, and going more towards species that are maybe not lesser known, I guess, and fun, but really interesting. The guy that I co-hosted with, Dr. David Ebert, he is known as the Lost Shark Guy, and he has discovered and described over 50 sharks in his lifetime. So it's a pretty cool podcast, and we interview other shark scientists and conservationists, and we dive into their careers and how it's been. It's not a straight line, it's more meandering. So it's a pretty fun podcast to do.
Okay, so why ocean science? What made you want to jump into the ocean or the waters? What made you want to do that?
Yeah, growing up in Toronto, you're not surrounded by the ocean at all. So I don't think I touched the ocean until I was about 9 or 10 years old. And, before that, though, I watched a lot of Jacques Cousteau documentaries, National Geographic. We have CBC up here, so that we had the natural things or nature of things. And it was just like it was basically through TV. I was like, this underwater world is phenomenal. And why am I not around it more is essentially what I was looking at, or I don't know much about it. And so in the 80s and 90s, I was infatuated with it. And when I turned 14, I found out that, I can make a living out of this. Okay, cool. So I followed that passion all throughout high school, and I went to university, and I've been working in it ever since.
How long have you been working in this field?
Well, I guess it depends on how you look at, marine biology and science communication. So, I graduated in 2001 from undergrad. So I always look at it from that perspective. So I've been working in this for over 20 years, almost 25 years now. And actually this year will be 25 years. And, I've worked as a researcher, I've worked as a consultant, I've worked as a technician, I've worked all with as a database manager and GIS analyst. I've done pretty much a lot of the different things that have gone on, with oceans and all the different things you can jump into. And then I got into science communication in and around like the 2010s, early 2010s, during the BP oil spill. And I really noticed at that point the effect that certain scientists were having on the public by being able to speak about science. When I was first starting out, science communication wasn't a big thing. Speaking about science was not encouraged to the public. And not necessarily because, the public wouldn't understand or anything like that. It was, if you spoke to a journalist, and a lot of journalists back then would manipulate what you said. And so it never happened to me, but I had science, like mentors and stuff that it happened to, and they just, they weren't into speaking about science to the public. And I've always been someone who enjoys storytelling and enjoys, what's happening and looking at, what we could do with the ocean. And all of a sudden I'm like, oh no, I kind of want to talk about this. And when I saw other people, Wallace J. Nichols, Sylvia Earle, who else? Carl Safina. They were all down at the sites where we saw the tar balls at BP oil spill, like along the Gulf of Mexico shores, and they would like Carl Safina rented a plane and flew over the spill area to really show what was happening. People were taking pictures of dolphins, swimming through and jumping through the oil slicks. And they were very powerful messages. And I said, you know what? That's a really important aspect to conservation that we don't focus on enough. And it's not necessarily because people don't want to talk about science. It's just we're not incentivized through our careers. We don't get extra money. Like professors and academics don't get extra money. Government, you have to be very careful what you say and when you talk about your science because it's government. It's got to be perfect. It's got to be well crafted. And then like nonprofit organizations, they do a lot of the science communication, and it's great to be a part of that. But I wanted to do something of my own, and I kind of went from writing a blog because blogs were popular back then, and then I went to YouTube in the early 2010s, and then I went to podcasting because podcasting was probably the best thing that I could do at the time. Editing video after doing a full-time job, recording a video and editing it so it would go out that night was difficult. I had two kids that were toddlers at the time, and I wanted to spend more time with them and not have to worry about that. And I was tired when they went to bed, and I wanted to relax. So it was very difficult. So I got into podcasting, which made it easier for me. I could just sit down and just interview somebody, or when I finally just started to do solo shows, I could just read an article, sit down, and talk about it because a lot of people just didn't know about what was happening in the ocean, and I got to tell them through that.
Okay. What is the main disconnect between the public and the scientists? And is there any information that's gatekept, whether that's in the government or it's just something else?
I mean, the biggest disconnect, I think there's a misunderstanding of scientists, especially marine biologists, from the public. And it's not necessarily the public's fault for that. A lot of the times we're kind of like the parent of the environment, like when it comes to the environment, it was like, no, actually, this is wrong, or this is wrong, or what this person said is wrong. And we're very quick to point out what's wrong. So say a documentary comes out, a lot of us scientists will come on and be like, actually, that's not right. Or that's not like Shark Whisperer came out, this past year. And a lot of the stuff that the person was saying about the documentary was just, no, that's not right, or that's a kind of a lie, or this isn't right, or that's not what science says. And so we become a little negative when it comes around that. And people see that and they're like, oh, why are these scientists always, kind of crapping on the party? And so a lot of people don't like us for that. And I get it. I totally get it. What people don't see though is the side that we really enjoy. We really enjoy being out on the ocean. We really enjoy learning about the ocean. As a marine biologist and any kind of person in ocean conservation, it's not just a job to us, it's a lifestyle. And a lot of us get burnt out because of it, because we're always working, we're always talking about it, we're traveling because of it. If you're in the field, sometimes you're working overnight, sometimes you're working during the day, sometimes you're in the office, sometimes you're in the lab, you're on a ship for like a month. And it's very disruptive to a regular lifestyle that a person with a 9 to 5 job would have. And that's fine because we go into it. But I think a lot of people think we make a lot of money, and that's just not true. As marine biologists, we don't get paid a lot. We get paid based on funding, and sometimes that funding is not a lot. And so we have a lot of that disconnect. But the reason why I did the podcast and had people on the podcast was to show who scientists really are, to get a bit of their personality out there, and talk about the projects that they're so passionate about. And a lot of the times when I have somebody on, a lot of the people who like my audience will comment like, I really like that person. Can you have them back on? Like, I love the way they speak, or I love how passionate they are about the projects that they are. I didn't think scientists were like this. I thought they were elitist. I thought they were this. I thought they were that. And so there's a lot of misconceptions about it, but they're broken when they listen to the people on our podcast. And it's not political. It's just science. It's like, hey, this is what the science is saying. And sometimes governments will go with the science, and sometimes they'll go against it. And that's when you see scientists start to speak out, like you probably see, these days with a lot of the policies that are being put out.
Absolutely, especially in the United States.
Yeah.
Now, the Great Lakes, legal issues now. Great Lakes, I guess Lake Superior would be one of them. How does the United States and Canada have, I don't know, water disputes between land, if that's even a thing. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's a bilateral agreement with between the U.S. and Canada when it comes to managing the Great Lakes. So we all have like there's basically a line that goes down specific areas of the Great Lakes. You know, Lake Erie, Lake Ontario, Lake Superior, Lake Michigan is pretty much I think all in the U.S. But Lake Huron is mostly in Canada. So it's usually Superior, Erie, and in Ontario. But they manage it together, and I've been actually part of teams that manage it together. We were doing a nearshore water quality framework when I was working with Environment Canada for a while, and there would be constant meetings with U.S. authorities, state and federal authorities, to manage that. Now, when you were looking at those management styles from an on the ground kind of work when we're doing the workshops and we're trying to come up with specific indicators to say what would be good to go into a framework or what would be good to go into say a law or a regulation that is agreeable to both Canada and the US. Most of the time there's agreement. It's mostly about the science, not necessarily about the politics of the borders. But then of course you're going to have like water usage, what's being emptied into the Great Lakes. The Great Lakes don't have a physical border going down the middle, to demarcate, Canada and the U.S. So if Canada puts out bad water quality or something into the water and it goes onto the U.S. side, it's going to affect the people in the U.S. just as much as if it was the other way around. It's going to affect the people in Canada. And so, there's obviously regulations on that side and there's agreements on that side that we both have to manage. And then if something happens, I'm sure there's restitution that needs to be paid to either side. From my knowledge, though, there hasn't been a lot of disputes. There's a little bit in terms of water usage and how that's affected. But with our relationship, like Canada and US's relationship, it's usually pretty good. And usually they get kind of fixed pretty quickly.
All right, all right. So for individuals now, what is one thing people can do about ocean conservation?
The biggest thing is learn. Actually, before that, I would say the biggest thing is touch grass or touch water. That would be the biggest thing. Is you talked earlier about the disconnect between sort of the public and science. There's a big disconnect between all of us and nature. We are in a society right now where we can lose ourselves within the planet, like within the world. We are stuck to these phones. We are stuck to our cars to go somewhere. We are stuck within our lives of, I need to get to there yesterday and I need to go here and I need to travel and I need to do this and I need to do that. And I want to live life to the fullest and I got to do it quickly, and I think sometimes we just need to slow down and we need to just look around and we need to really understand all the different pressures and influences and anxieties that we have in our lives. A lot of the times those can be cured by just sitting by nature and enjoying a hike or enjoying being by the water. Dr. Wallace J. Nichols, who has since passed, so rest in peace, he wrote a book called The Blue Mind. And that book was, I think, life-changing for a lot of people, especially in ocean conservation. And what he did is he was a sea turtle biologist originally and an ocean conservationist. And he worked in that lifestyle, like that industry for quite a long time, that field for quite a long time. And then he had an idea to write a book, which essentially would merge ocean conservation with neurobiology. And so he got a bunch of neuroscientists together and he would do workshops and he talked to them and they wrote this book. And essentially what it looked at was how water influences our mind, how it influences our health, our minds, our mindfulness, our state of mind, everything that goes forward. And it shows that even just the color of water, the color blue, is a relaxing color. It makes us tranquil. And I think that's really important. When we go on vacation, we want to be by the water, many of us, right? We want to be somewhere in nature a lot of the times. Here in Canada, we'll go skiing. Or we'll go skating, but we'll do pond hockey, or we'll be outside. We'll be, hiking. In the US, you can be in California and Florida, along the Gulf states. You're around water, you're along the beach, and you're relaxing in tropical weather. And people enjoy that because it relaxes them. They go where they're going to relax. Not a lot of people, and I mean, obviously, New York City and Vegas, they're like a big, tourist attraction, but it's a busy attraction. Sometimes you don't feel relaxed when you go in those places. And then, of course, I've been to New York City, I've been to Vegas, I love the places and stuff. But when I want to go to relax, I want to go to, a beach. I want to go to somewhere where there's water, and a lot of people are the same way. And just be in nature, observe animals. Like you start to really understand how good it is for us, like for a health perspective, to interact with nature. And so I would say the biggest thing is just reconnect. If you haven't, reconnect with nature, and you'll start to realize how delicate it is, but how important it is to our lives. Every second breath we take is oxygen provided by the ocean. Every second breath. So just think about that. No matter where you are in the world, every second breath, the oxygen we get is from the ocean.
It's crazy to think about, and think about 4.55 billion years and all that oxygen created just
Absolutely.
because one comet hit another at the precise time for dinosaurs and humans to come about.
Yeah.
So speaking of rivers and nature, in Frederick, Maryland, I will tell you this. That's where I'm currently located.
Nice.
Um, so at the moment, there was a council vote or a city council vote, 5-2, passed a data center, and didn't know about it. No one told us this. We didn't get to vote on this. And it's like they just swept it right under our noses because, the corporate conglomerates are polluting, the rivers and the streams, and the AI and the art is not real art because it's just flankers as
Right.
it. And that term is from Clone Wars, but apparently
Yeah.
it's really caught on now.
I can imagine. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. I mean,
so,
oh, sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
uh, okay, so how do we clean up the oceans, or what is your advice on just, you know, getting people to use less of Rock and Chat GPT and I don't know, and whatever Canva has, but to
Yeah.
just take a moment and realize all the water usage and the carbon emissions that's coming out of these AI data centers.
It's really interesting because we went through a very similar thing with cryptocurrency. Data mining for cryptocurrency like uses a lot of water because, essentially what happens with these AI servers and the crypto servers is they heat up. And so water needs to be passed through so that these data centers can cool down and they can stay cool, or else they'll overheat and they won't work anymore. Um, and it's a very difficult process to do because AI, as you know, is catching on quickly. Cryptocurrency has caught on huge around the world. And these data centers are being built in a lot of places that we don't even know of. A lot of these places are in very impoverished neighborhoods, or they're in very secluded areas where there's actually water problems already. And so they're putting these data centers in there because it's cheap land, and they can put them in there and nobody's going to say anything because they may not know of a vote that's happening at city council, or they may not know the problems that it's going to do, like it's going to cause that place. And so it could be a very difficult thing to look after, especially how it's catching on. Everybody uses AI in some sort of fashion, whether we want to or not, right? And I'll be honest, I use AI, and I don't think we should stop using AI. I think we should be getting better at looking at a new industry or looking at a new service like AI and understanding how it could impact, especially as it's exploding in growth. So for instance, these data centers that are being built, they're being built all over the place at probably a pace that we haven't seen before because more and more people are using it. They need to have these data centers to work the system properly as more and more people adopt these systems and as we start using it in more complex ways, right? And so I think what we need to do is set regulations faster and slow the pace down of these data centers being built and being like, you can only build these in certain places. You can't build these in areas where there's already water problems. And we can identify where those places are. We know where those places are. Just because it's cheaper land doesn't mean you need to be put in there. And so we also have to look at water usage. You have to put in regulations with these new AI centers saying, hey, you know what? You can only use a certain amount of water in this area, or you have to keep a certain amount of water available for residential areas or other commercial uses. And so by putting in those regulations beforehand, you get to understand it's kind of like other things like deep sea mining, where it's like we have this opportunity to take what we've learned from the past of these exploding industries and do it right. If we just take our time and say, hey, you know what? If we put this in an area where there's plenty of available water, then these data centers aren't going to impact the local residents. They're not going to impact the local environment as much as they would somewhere else. And so we have these regulations in place. Let's start utilizing them. The problem is these, lobby groups and businesses start to get into well with these politicians, and they start to say, hey, if we come in, we're going to give you a lot of money to the city, and we're going to help out your city, and you're going to love it, and your citizens are going to love it, and all this kind of stuff. But then they just use it and abuse it to the point where like the people actually have problems. So you can use like the oil and gas industry as an example. The biggest advantage for someone to say, hey, we're going to use oil and gas in the city is, they employ the people, they give money to the cities, and they play like a big role. But then when they leave these old oil wells that aren't working properly. They leak all the time. When they leak, they get into the groundwater, and it can affect the health of the citizens that live there. When they leave, they don't take the employees, they don't give them benefits, they don't clean up their mess of these wastewater ponds that have oil and any kind of other metals that are in it. And it just leaves in a disaster. As an example, you can look at Southern Louisiana as an example. They had like their land got cut up, literally got cut up. Graves got disturbed just because of all the ships that are cutting through the marshlands and the bayous and just totally destroying that land. Or the fact that there's oil wells that are leaking, or there's refineries that are dubbed Cancer Alley for anybody who's living around there. We have to look at these industries and understand the consequences that could happen from them before they come in, and put in regulations to control it, and then enforce those regulations. Not to say, hey, you guys at AI, this is great. We're really looking forward to having these data centers. They don't do anything for the land. They don't do anything for the environment. So we have to make sure that they are not going to destroy that for the rest of the citizens who live there, and put in the proper regulations, because we have this chance to do it right. And if we don't take that chance, that means we've just blown it, and we've caused another sector that has caused the problems with the environment.
Back to the data centers, they use so much water just to cool them. Why not just be in a very cold environment, or or just or even have it like an indoor outdoor thing where you get enough cold air to just at least cool the systems? Why does it always have to be water?
Honestly, it's a great question. I don't know exactly all the alternatives that they could do. Putting it in a colder climate usually makes sense, but again, you're putting, say you want to put in the Arctic, you want to put in Alaska, you want to put it in the Canadian Arctic. It comes with its own problems. Like if it's going to heat up some places, what's it going to do to the water that's going out into a colder environment? Is it going to just stay the same? Is it not going to stay the same? Again, regulations need to happen. Also, the local people that are there, how is it going to affect their lives? We don't really know. So I think the biggest thing is looking at where to put it is a huge thing. So if a cooler environment or a temperate environment makes sense, put it in a temperate environment. Like, why would you put it somewhere in like Arizona when you don't need to? I assume proximity matters to have these like more local data centers for people who are using it all over. But yeah, putting in a cool environment makes sense to me, but I'm not an engineer, so I don't know exactly, what the immediate benefits or long-term benefits or consequences are for those.
Okay. So a lot of activities in water. We were talking about nature a little earlier. Fishing. Certainly, um, with with all the oceanic disturbances, has there been, what have you noticed on fish and certain populations in regards to either the climate or pollution? Has it gone up, gone down, or is there, or I'm not sure what I'm asking, or is there something else that's happening because fish prices are at least going up in the States here? So, any effects on that, on the population of fish?
Yeah, I mean, fish population is a lot of times is affected by mismanagement of fisheries, and so overfishing is a huge problem around the world. There are certain fisheries that are well managed. In the U.S. and Canada, you can argue that they're well managed, but others are not well managed, even within the U.S. and Canada. A lot of data needs to be put into place. There's certain reasons, like Oceania in Canada does an audit every year on all its fisheries, and even though the Fisheries Act requires Canada to take stock of all their and have the same information for all their major fisheries, they still don't. They only have it for a portion of them, and even then, the ones that they have is not very good. So they need more information. Um, and so the fact that people are physically taking fish out of the sea without putting it back or allowing them to replenish is a huge problem. Within exclusive economic zones, within the borders of certain countries, those countries are able to manage the fish the way they see fit. Most of them are part of international agreements to make sure that they're doing it properly. Do they enforce them? There's a lot of difficulty in enforcing them out at sea all the time. There's a lot of boats that are out there that are not being tracked, and some of them are, but I think 75% of world boats or fishers are not being tracked, fishing boats. So that's a problem too. So there are a lot of problems, but there's a lot of headway within that. A lot of those fisheries, or some of the fisheries, there are certification programs for some of those fisheries that look at tracking where the fish was caught all the way through the supply chain to where it's being sold. And so for the most part, those that are tracked, you can actually say, yeah, they're sustainable. We can buy them, and they might be a little bit more expensive these days. I mean, everything is more expensive these days because the world is kind of going crazy and everything's expensive. But with certain fish, if they're well managed, it costs more money. So that might be more money, depending on the fish, and so I think just with the economy the way it is, with everything that's going on in the world, things are more expensive. Fish are more expensive because, some of them aren't seen as much. Tuna is always going to be expensive because they're going extinct and people are still fishing them in and they're not being well managed. Or sometimes they're being well managed, sometimes they're not in some areas. Sharks are being caught at a record highs and people don't even know they're eating sharks for most of the time. If you go to a couple of years ago, I think it was probably 5 or 6 years ago by now, Oceania did a survey in Canada and in the US, and they found that 48% of the fish that people buy are fraudulent, meaning they're not the fish that you expect. So if you think you're eating tuna steaks, it's not a tuna steaks, it's a shark that is very high in carcinogens. Or if you think you're eating sea bass, like a whitefish, no, it's not a whitefish. It's a whitefish, but it's not sea bass. They found that it's like tilapia, freshwater fish. But people don't realize it because they come in fillets and they just kind of put it together. Now, a lot of the times they found that the seafood markets didn't even know. It's just every time when they go exchange hands through the supply chain, it makes it more difficult to track and see what people are doing. That makes it difficult. It could be as they catch them and they bring them back into into like a trawler or like a storage ship, and you bring them back and, you cut them up so much that you don't know if they're a shark or another kind of fish. And then, so there's that, or they change them throughout the supply chain.
Is there is this specific to the US where we are not as regulated, or is it, or is it something that's just allowed to happen where we're not eating the necessarily the fish that's portrayed on the packaging?
Well, from the fraudulent aspect, it's a supply chain thing. It's somebody throughout there is trying to make more money than they can. I mean, you try and go buy sea bass compared to tilapia, sea bass is a lot more expensive. and so they can make more money by having a cheaper fish to raise. And a lot of those are aquaculture. And so it's just, that one is just more of it's just criminal, it's just a criminal aspect. The fisheries in the U.S. Are quite regulated. The Magnuson-Stevens Act is really well done, and it's brought a lot of fish back, to a regular population. In fact, like the U.S. in the 1970s installed a number of different regulations that helped a lot of species come back from the brink of extinction. So the Marine Mammal Protection Act brought the sea lions and seals back from the brink of extinction, from hunting and so forth. The Magnuson-Stevens Act brought fish back, like sardines and anchovies back, that fed the seals and sea lions, especially on California's coast. So that protected there, and as well as other fisheries. I'm just using them as an example. And then the Endangered Species Act protected like things like the great white shark that fed on sea lions and seals. So they weren't being hunted, and so they weren't being killed at a record pace. But they were able to eat the sea lions and seals because they were protected by the Marine Mammal Protection Act. And of course, the seals and sea lions ate the fish that were protected by the Magnuson-Stevens Act, which all of it turned into quite the successful conservation story. When we look at great whites now on both sides of the coast of the U.S. and Canada, we're seeing an increase in sightings. We're seeing an increase in size. We're seeing an increase in the number of great white sharks that are around, which help regulate and stabilize communities of fish and invertebrates, on both sides of the coast. So that's a big conservation story that is done due to regulations that were put in by the U.S. in the 1970s. And I'll tell you this, it was put in by Republicans, right?
It
so like, it's not
Nixon.
even a partisan thing,
What, was it put in by Nixon? It was.
I think some of them were, yeah, while he was there.
That would also make sense because he did create the EPA though, but
yeah,
crazy.
Yeah, and the EPA was created too, right?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously that party has changed over the years to be a little bit more environmentally friendly, but you have to remember at some point they valued that because they're the people, like the fishers and the people who would benefit from having tourism out and fishing for fish to sell to people to eat. Like that was a big thing for them, and they cared about the people, for that area.
Okay. So now speaking of certain sightings, we've certainly seen more sharks, especially off the coast of Florida for whatever reason. And I lived there for a few years, and I'll tell you this, it's like a lot more sightings. Like people once got out of the water in Lake Worth, and they were right out at Lake Worth Beach specifically.
Yep.
Got right out. Flag goes up. They're out. And I don't think I actually saw the shark, but it was enough. And a lot, and apparently they really do just like going up in the sand or getting close there with within like a football field's distance of it there. Is there a reason why they come so close to, either the beach or just close to land?
Mm-hmm.
And why aren't they staying deeper in the ocean or is it the fact that the ocean has warmed up about 2 degrees Celsius?
I mean, it's a bunch of different things, right? Any animal in the ocean or any animal on land will go where they can feed and hide from other predators, right? A number of years, Florida as a state usually has the highest bite per capita in the world, more than Australia, and more than California. For some reason, Florida's there. Now, and a lot of them are not done by like huge animals. You're not done necessarily by tiger sharks or bull sharks. I mean, some of them are, but not a lot. Some of them are done by like blacktip reef sharks or another type of shark that's not notably as what we consider harmful or dangerous. The one thing about the Florida's coast is there's a lot of sharks. There's a lot of fish. It's a beautiful coastline and it's a diverse coastline. And these sharks, a lot of the times, are around you. You just don't realize it. If you're in the water in California, in Florida, there's a good chance that there's a shark that's nearby. You just don't see it. You may not be in clear waters. You may be in, like, I've been off the coast of Daytona, and there are probably sharks around there. You just don't realize it. They just don't care that much about you. Most of the bites are by accident. They think there's something else there and they make a mistake and then they bite, right? It's really unfortunate that it happens so much there. But it does happen because there's huge populations of sharks. There's at some point of a time of year, I don't know if it's in the winter, but there's a huge migrations of blacktip reef sharks along the Atlantic coast, right up the coastline, like close to the coastline. You'll see thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of sharks move in the same direction. It's just the way nature is. They're there because of food. They're there because of it's easier to navigate because there aren't any predators. Sharks will eat other sharks, so there's not there's not as many predators out there for them that size, and they know there's food in that area. And so when it comes to that, you just have to be careful. And what I should say, like, a lot of the government authorities, state and federal, are always on the lookout for these sharks. They're always making sure that they want people to be safe. They don't want people to get to get bitten or have a negative incident with these sharks. And there's also people who fish for sharks right off the beach. I'm sure you saw it either off a pier or right off the beach. There's a huge recreational fishery for shark fishing off the beach. And so sometimes you're going to get, like, some of them, people are getting bit because these sharks are being, caught, from fisheries. Not all the time, but sometimes that happens as well. So they're coming in for that. But they're coming in basically for food. You'll see a lot of times a hammerhead shark, like, really flying around very aggressively in the shallow waters because it's probably stalking a stingray, and that stingray is trying to get out of the way, and it's just moving back and forth. And a lot of people are like, "Oh my God, it's coming to attack us." No, it's actually coming to grab, a stingray or try and catch something that it's hunting, if a fish or a stingray of some sort. Now, a couple of years ago, maybe even more than that now, near the panhandle of Florida, so like up near Tallahassee and so forth, there were a lot more shark bites that were happening. And that was due to tides coming in more than usual, bringing in fish that are coming in more than usual, and then so the sharks are coming in to follow the food, follow their prey, and there were a lot of bites that were happening there. And so they were attributing it to that. So it wasn't necessarily like, you see on social media this, all the sharks are coming to get us because they don't like what's happening in the ocean, or they don't like what we're doing to the ocean. No, that's not the case. It's food, and it's could be just currents bringing in the food that they want. So a lot of times when a current changes, it'll come into close to shore. You'll see plankton kind of come in, so the water might be a little bit more cloudy because there's more animals that we can't see that are in there. And then the fish will come in to eat those, and then the predators will come in to eat those. And that's usually why we have sharks that come in like that.
Okay. Activities in water, and then I'll ask you about your podcast.
Sure.
So a lot of people, I do see rowing in the Olympics, on the oceans, and everything in the lakes. I guess, how do we keep the lakes and oceans and streams just clean, and what were, if any, were the best educational campaigns?
Yeah. Like, when it comes to, water quality and cleanliness, I wouldn't say it's because, obviously more people in there could cause, bad water quality just because of the stuff on our skin or the lotions and all that kind of stuff and the soaps. But that's very localized. That's very minimal compared to, the stuff that's coming in from the shores, or from water treatment plants, or from stormwater sewers and that kind of stuff. That's where a lot of it originates, is on land, and it has to go somewhere. The oceans are all connected, and all the waterways are all connected to the oceans. So you can have water from Colorado go out somewhere into the ocean, along the Pacific coast, and it can be tracked all the way, following it wherever it goes. That happens. At some point, the water is going to get to the ocean. It's going to come in from rains, or it's going to come in from something, and it's going to go into the oceans. And that's like, that's a cool thing that happens. And we just don't realize, a lot of us don't realize that everybody's connected. Whether you live in the Midwest in the US or live in central Canada, it all goes out into the ocean. And so that's the first thing to realize. The other thing is all those pollutants that go into that water will also go out into the ocean, and they will accumulate in those oceans. And a lot of times, if you go outside and you hit where the river meets the ocean, an estuary, right? So it's kind of salty, kind of fresh water. A lot of the times, all the stuff that comes downstream from those rivers, you'll see a lot of plastic pollution. You'll see a lot of other types of pollution. You'll see bad water quality. You'll see a bunch of nitrogen and phosphates and all that accumulate from fertilizers and any other type of materials, chemical materials that we use will all accumulate and all go into that ocean. Now, some places get cleaned up from that area. They'll have, like, there's a place, actually, I think it's in Chesapeake Bay, Mr. Trash Wheel, and that will clean up a lot of the trash that goes into it. But the big thing is policy. So government policies need to be put in place and enforced to ensure that companies are not polluting, or other places are not polluting in the ocean. And sometimes it's just an area becomes really big in population size, and so the water treatment plants need to be upgraded to handle that amount of waste, right? And that's really what it comes down to most of the time. But then there's other times where you have historical pollution. So New York Harbor in New York City is a great example of a great successful conservation story. Back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, there was a lot of pollution that went in there. There were a lot of chemical plants, warehouses, and so forth along that pier, and they would go into the Hudson River, and then eventually end up out into the ocean, in the harbor, in the ocean. And so we lost the menhaden, which are fish that the humpback whales will eat. And so we lost a lot of that stuff just because of bad water quality. Well, over the years and over the decades, people started to realize that, hey, if we want a good harbor, we want whales to come back, and we want menhaden to come back because the whales will come back, and we want just a clean waterway, we need to clean up our act. And so regulations went in and controlled what businesses could actually put out and pollute into the ocean. You got to remember, a lot of places, like in the harbors, like historical big city harbors, small city harbors, a lot of sewage and everything like that was going in raw. It wasn't being treated because we didn't necessarily have the technology back then. Now we have the technology. It's not as expensive as it used to be when it first came out. And cities and places along the coastline are starting to put those in. You'd still be surprised at how many places that don't have treatment plants along their shores, but we're starting to see more and more and more. So the water quality is actually getting better because of the innovation, because of the technology that we're inputting into there and helping out our system. So the fact that, going back to a New York City example, it's gotten a lot cleaner. The menhaden came back, and the humpback whales are coming back, and that means the sharks are coming back, and the sea turtles are coming back, and the tuna and all that kind of stuff are coming back. And we're seeing a great water area and water harbor for New York City, which is wonderful to see.
Okay. You mentioned your podcast earlier. Do you want to talk more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I started the podcast because I had a family member and a lot of friends who were asking me a lot about the ocean and what was happening. One person said, hey, this climate change thing, is this something that we need to be worried about? At first I was like, how do you not know this? Like, yes, it's something we need to worry about. And I realized after that, this is again in the early 2010s. And I realized after, I was like, look, there's so much competition for your attention around. Like, we're in the attention kind of economy right now. And so there's so much competition for attention that, the ocean's not always going to get the attention. And if you share negative news, it's not always going to get the attention because nobody wants doom and gloom. I was once sitting at a restaurant, and I was part of a CrossFit gym. We all went out to dinner one time, and the owner of the CrossFit gym said, hey, Andrew, I was doing videos at the time. Hey, Andrew, I saw your videos. I started watching them, but then I had to stop because after I started to get depressed. And I realized a lot of the videos that I was saying, at first I was insulted. I'm like, what do you mean? And I realized after, a lot of the things I was saying was doom and gloom stuff, right? Like, oh, we're doing something wrong. You're doing that. I was that scientist, I was telling people that we were doing something wrong. And so after that, I changed my thought process around the communication that I do, and to start, sharing hopeful, optimistic stuff that's happening around the ocean, conservation success stories like great white sharks, like New York City Harbor and everything like that. Now, not all of it's going to be good news, But there are some really good conservation success stories, especially working with local communities and getting down to the gritty and just going in and being like, hey, this is what we need to do to help out. And so I think it's a huge thing that we need to do. I put it out 3 days a week now. I've gone up and down in terms of frequencies over the years, depending on my time. Usually episodes are about 15 minutes to 20 minutes. If they're solo episodes, if they're interviews, they're about an hour. But the idea is for people to learn about the ocean, get hope for the ocean, and speak up for the ocean as well. Like learn that voting matters and voting the right people in for the ocean matters, and we need this ocean. So first I hope to inspire by telling you about the ocean. Then I hope to inspire you to take action and speak up and vote for the right people if you're in a democratic society. And then, of course, live for a better ocean individually. No single-use plastic, or reduce your single-use plastics. Try and like drive less, or if you can afford it, get an EV car, like an electric vehicle, or like try and refurbish your house or apartments or whatever that if you can. All these things is like just sharing the different options and how people are protecting the ocean, so that people can kind of like get a guide on what they can do and what other people are doing to inspire them to do it themselves.
Okay, I think this was a wonderful episode. Anything else you want to promote? Any books? Anything?
Well, at this point, if you go to speakupforblue.com, you can get access to both of those shows. We're on every podcast app. We're on YouTube. And so you can find all that information at speakupforblue.com. In terms of books, there's a lot of books. I have them all behind me here. There's so many books that you can go. Why Sharks Matter is a great book. If you like sharks, there's a lot of identification books for sharks and knowledge about sharks. There's just a bunch of books out there, but I recommend those right off the bat. Start off with the Speak Up for Blue, because I have authors on my podcast all the time. Actually, there is a book called Sea Change. That's a great book. I don't know if I have it handy right now. That's a new book that's come out, and that's a fantastic recommendation.
All right, just taking a few notes here, Sea Change. Okay, so I'll promote my stuff. If you are on lulu.com, please purchase this, a journal that will help you take notes. It won't help you take notes. You write the notes in there, and
Love it.
and you can give me something back if you want to support my audiobooks. Check me out on Chirp. Adam Rothstein's my name. I have Growing Hockey, Growing Baseball, an audiobook on MLB stadiums, Chess the Game for Peace and Prosperity. Chess the Game for Peace and Prosperity, and Determination. That's the name of the audiobook. All available wherever you get your audiobooks, right there. And specifically Spotify too. If you have Spotify Premium, you can actually listen to them for free. So please check them out. And anything else, Andrew, before I end this segment?
No, I mean, the idea is just really get back into nature, connect with the ocean if you can, or connect with nature if you can this weekend, or after you listen to this, or while you're listening to this podcast. But I appreciate having me on, Adam. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Much appreciated. All right. Thank you, everyone. And that'll do it for this episode. Peace out.